Helen, her parents shouted from downstairs, we're going out now. See you later. Bye, we should be back around midnight, enjoy your night out as well, okay? Bye. There followed some muffled conversation from the living room downstairs. They were probably saying goodbye to Andrew, her brother. After a few seconds the door creaked open and then closed. Footsteps on the drive, the car doors opening and closing, and then the sound of the engine and the muffled sound of a car radio as Helen and Andrew's parents drove off on their night out. Helen was 17 years old, only a couple of months away from her 18th birthday, and was getting ready for her usual Friday night out with some of her college friends. They usually went to a couple of local pubs before heading to a nightclub in the center of Leeds until the early hours of the morning. As she was getting ready, she opened the curtains slightly of her bedroom window to see what the weather was like before deciding what she would be wearing this evening. It seemed like quite a pleasant, dry evening, quite warm even though it was the end of February and still, technically, winter. So Helen decided on a black dress and a small jacket, but also wore a pair of black tights in some vain attempt to keep warm against the cold, early morning air as she waits for a taxi on her way home. Finally, after getting dressed, she cleaned everything away in her room. About half an hour after her parents had gone, she headed downstairs ready for the night out. She checked her watch against the clock. 7:45, it was more than enough time to get to Linda's house for 8. She peered into the living room as she passed. There was Andrew in his usual position, slumped on the sofa, watching some rubbish on television. I'm going now, Helen said to him. Okay, see you later, Andrew replied sullenly without bothering to look up from the television. Helen waited, as though she was going to say something else, shook her head, thought better of it and continued out. It's odd, Helen thought as she started walking towards Linda's house. Andrew has become so sullen, so distant over the last 6 months. Her parents had noticed too, but just put it down to the fact that it was his final year and his exams were coming up this year. Helen wasn't so sure, though. He was never what you'd call outgoing, but he had enough friends. He had a few girlfriends in the past, nothing too serious, but then he was only 15. Recently though, he seemed to shut himself off from the outside world, never going out in the evening, no dates, nothing. Helen used to think that they were fairly close as well, but even that seems to have changed as well. They had the odd fight, they were brother and sister after all, but at least they talked, argued, made friends again. Recently, though, there wasn't even a spark of a sibling relationship to cause a fire of an argument. At least it means he can revise for his exams properly, she thought to herself, trying to make something positive out of his recent behavior. As she got to the end of her street, she felt some drops of rain. She looked up at the night sky and noticed some clouds starting to block out the stars. She stopped walking for a second and considered heading back home to get a coat. After a while though, she decided to pick up her pace and get to Linda's quickly. She felt no more drops of rain after that, so slowed down again. The sounds of her high heels were echoing around the built-up streets of the part of Leeds where she lived. It wasn't too far from the city center, but it still managed to be a fairly quiet neighborhood. After about 10 more minutes she finally reached her destination and rang the bell to Linda's house. Helen could see Linda approaching the door through the frosted pane. She could see that Linda was just dressed in an old pair of jeans and a t-shirt. As she opened the door, Helen could see that her nose was red and she was sniffling and coughing quite loudly. Helen, she said in surprise, what are you doing here? Well, I thought we were going out. Didn't Tracy ring you? Well, obviously she didn't. She said she would though. God, Helen, I'm sorry, but tonight's been cancelled. What? Aren't any of the others going out either? No, after college today, I didn't feel too good. So I rang Tracy to say I wasn't going out. She then said that she didn't fancy going out either and would ring round everybody and let them know she didn't ring though. I wonder if Karen and Joanne know as well. Helen looked at herself and smiled, all dressed up and nowhere to go. Look, I'm sorry Helen, don't worry, it's not your fault, just one of those things. She looked around trying to think of something to say, to show she wasn't annoyed. She was though. Look, anyway, I hope you're feeling better soon though. Do me a favor though, will you? Ring both Karen and Joanne, just to make sure they got the message. Will do. See you later. With that, Linda closed the door and Helen started to walk home. Linda hadn't looked well at the end of college earlier that day, but she said she'd be okay to go out that evening. Helen was mad at Tracy though. She was unreliable. It was nothing malicious. She was unreliable and just completely useless. Helen hated to make generalizations, but on a Venn diagram where one circle represented dizzy and the other represented blonde, Tracy would be placed firmly in the join. It's not what you'd call a large enough sample for statistical analysis, but a clear pointer all the same. Helen smiled to herself. Second year on a business studies course, 2 hours of statistics a week, and here's Helen making jokes that even a nerdy statistician would find difficult to laugh at. At about 8 to 15 she turned the corner into her street and walked to her own house. The rain started coming down then, and she rushed up the path and went inside, closing the door behind her. She walked into the living room expecting to find Andrew still slumped on the sofa, still being brainwashed by the television, but the room was empty and the television switched off. She stepped back into the hall. "Andrew," she shouted upstairs, "it's Helen. I'm home for the night now." She heard banging noises coming from upstairs, towards the front of the house. Andrew's bedroom was directly in front of her at the top of the stairs, so she knew the noises weren't coming from there. "Andrew," she shouted again, "what are you doing?" She slowly started to walk up the stairs. Still frantic noises were coming from one of the other rooms. As she got nearer she could tell they were coming from her room. She walked down the hall to her room, but before she reached it, the door burst open and Andrew came rushing out. He didn't stop to look at Helen or say anything, he just rushed by. His black Sabbath tour t-shirt was untidy, hanging out of his jeans, and his long hair was a mess. He ran by her carrying something and went straight into his own room, slamming the door behind him. Helen chased after him. "What the hell do you think you were doing in my room?" she screamed. Then she stopped and shouted at the closed door, "There better not be anything broken in there or else you're in big trouble. I'll be telling Mom and Dad when they get home." There was no reply from Andrew's room, and after swearing a few times at a closed door she decided it was a pointless thing to do. She went to her own room to see what had been going on. As she opened her door she could quickly see all the changes from how she left it earlier that evening. She distinctly remembered tidying up her room before going out. Now, though, there were several things all over the place. A red dress of hers had been laid out on the bed, with the coat hanger still inside. One of her wardrobe doors was open. Over the floor were several pieces of underwear, and her underwear drawer was half open as well. Stockings, tights, bras were all hanging over the side of the drawer. On the floor next to her bed were a couple of pairs of her shoes, one pair of black high-heel court shoe and a pair of sandals. Also lying in the middle of the floor was a pair of Andrew's socks. As Helen surveyed the scene in front of her, the anger started to dissipate. She began to realize what had been going on. It also gave an answer to a few things that had been happening recently. With a sigh she sat down on the bed and started to think about what she should do now. Over the last 6 months or so she had half noticed odd little things happening. Things like the straps on her shoes being undone when she could have sworn she'd fastened them. Clothes not being where she thought they were. Unopened packs of tights or stockings going missing, the door being ajar in her bedroom when she was sure it was closed. They were all odd little signs that she dismissed as herself being mistaken or that her mom had been in her room. Now that she thought about them, the answers were all starting to fit in place as to what had really been happening. It had been Andrew all along. Helen sighed and slowly started to clean the mess up. She didn't want to face Andrew just yet until she'd calmed down enough. Also, she wanted to think about what she was going to say. As she was cleaning the clothes away she tried to think back to when all these little incidents had started. She thought it was about 6 months ago, but then she wondered whether she was trying to make a connection between Andrew's moods and these incidents. Maybe it had all started at a different time, and actually there wasn't a connection to make. Now that she thought about it though, she was sure that it was last September when she first noticed it. She got a lot of new clothes for when she started the new year at college, and it was a couple of these new things that started disappearing and then mysteriously turning up a few days later. Now she started to try to remember when Andrew's moods started. Again, she was sure they started in September as well. Mom and Dad had put them down to starting his final year at school. getting nervous about all the exams that would be starting later that school year. She had to say something to Andrew, find out what was going on with him before deciding what she should do and how she should handle it. She had decided that he needed support from her though, and that was what she would try to provide. Finally she had finished tidying her room and, picking up Andrew's socks, left her room, walked down the hallway and gently knocked on Andrew's bedroom door. "Andrew," she said quietly. There was no answer, just silence from behind the door. "Andrew, listen, I'm not angry, but I think we need to talk." No answer. "Andrew, I'm coming in now. If you don't want me to, you'd better let me know. We really have to talk about this. I might be able to help." Still no answer, so she slowly opened the door and stepped into Andrew's room. Andrew was sat at his desk, half facing Helen but avoiding eye contact. The first thing Helen noticed was that Andrew had been crying. His eyes were still red. He was still dressed in the same things he was wearing as he passed her in the corridor, but she now noticed some extra things like he was wearing black tights under his jeans. She could see some of his ankle above his trainers. She also thought she could make out the outline of a bra strap underneath his t-shirt. He'd obviously been disturbed as he was getting changed into her things and quickly put his jeans, t-shirt and trainers over the top of her underwear when he heard Helen come back in. Helen sat on his bed at the side of him and sat quietly for a couple of seconds, composing her thoughts, trying to work out how to start. "Andrew," she said quietly, "I know what you've been doing and, believe me, I'm not angry with you, and don't worry, Mom and Dad won't ever find out about this from me." Andrew turned to face her and was about to speak, but Helen continued, "We do need to talk about what's been going on though. Helen, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, I promise, I won't." Andrew was almost in tears, pleading to Helen. "Calm down, look, there's nothing to be afraid of. You're not in trouble. I just want some answers before I decide how I can help you. You're my kid brother and I don't want to see you upset. If I can help you I will, okay?" "Okay, so, how long have you been borrowing my things, my clothes?" And, "Andrew, be honest." A long pause. Andrew's heart was racing as he thought about what to say. Helen urged him along. Eventually he said, "Since last summer." He finally said, then quickly followed it with, "But I won't take them again, I promise. I assume from the clothes that were laid out that you do get fully dressed up, dresses, shoes, everything. It's not just underwear, is it? You're trying to look like a girl, aren't you? Not just you being, fascinated with female underwear, is it?" Andrew was going red as she was asking this. He stuttered and mumbled in response to this. But then, so was Helen. She hoped he understood what she meant by fascinated. She couldn't think of any other way to say it. Helen continued, "Come on, Andrew, be honest with me. You might as well. It can't get any more embarrassing now, can it?" Yeah, I do get fully dressed up, everything. I enjoy dressing up and trying to look like a girl." "How long have you felt like this?" "Since I was about 9 or 10, I guess." Andrew was starting to relax and answer with more honesty, almost as if after all these years of guilt and shame, secrets and lies, he finally has the chance to talk to someone about it. "I've tried stopping. I mean, I know it's wrong and everything, but I just enjoy it. It makes me feel more, I don't know, more complete. I guess the word is it just scares me though." He continued, "I just don't know what it means. It's not like I'm gay, at least, I don't feel as though I'm gay. I feel really isolated, really alone with this." Andrew went silent, shaking his head. Helen then spoke, "You say this all started properly last summer, but you've known about it for years. When you started dressing up in my clothes, was that when you stopped going out? Is it when you stopped hanging about with your friends as much? And I noticed that's about the same time you finished with your last girlfriend, Lucy, as well. Are they all connected? I guess I just started shutting myself away from everybody. Deep down I think I was afraid that if people got to know me too well, then it would become obvious what I am, what I do, that eventually I would let something slip. I was petrified that everybody at school would find out because my life would become a complete misery. So I just stopped going out as often. With Lucy, though, I finished with her because we were getting too close. She used to drag me along with her when she went shopping for clothes and makeup, and I was afraid that I might be showing that I enjoyed doing those things. Because I did, I mean, I still do, but, I'm scared. I pretended to hate going shopping with her. Well, boys do, don't they? Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and I finished it with her. After a pause he added, I really liked her as well. It's okay. A lot of men are like you. It is kept secret though. Don't worry though. They're called transvestites. A lot are married, most are heterosexual, and they all tend to want to keep dressing up. It doesn't mean they want to become a woman. That's something completely different. Believe me, it is okay. It's nothing bad. You're just a transvestite and dressing up as a girl, acting in the role of a girl makes you happy, it feels right for you. I'm not angry with you. The worst thing is that I pretend that I want to stop. I feel as though it's wrong, but I guess deep down I don't want to stop. I like feeling this way. It's like I look at you like you are now, all dressed up and looking really good, and I feel sort of envious. Not in a bad way. I just think that that's how I want to look as well. You go out on a Friday night and you look really good, you're able to get dressed up for a night out, make yourself look good, and it's all part of the ritual of being a girl, and I want that feeling. I want that choice. Both Andrew and Helen went quiet for a while. Helen had forgotten that she was still wearing her black dress, high heels and jacket. Even though it was less than half an hour ago, it seemed ages. She smiled sadly at Andrew but said nothing. Andrew felt as though he'd shared more about himself with Helen over the last 10 minutes than he had with anybody else, ever. He'd almost forgotten about how embarrassed he'd felt a little earlier. He'd still got the underwear on underneath his own clothes, bra, panties, suspender belt and stockings. When he'd heard Helen come in, all he had time to do was put his jeans and t-shirt back on over the top. He looked up towards Helen for the first time since she'd come into his room. Helen, look, I'm sorry for taking your stuff. I know it was wrong and I promise I won't do it again. Don't worry about that. Again Helen went quiet, as though she was thinking things through. After a while she spoke. Listen, Andrew. I don't mind you borrowing my stuff every so often. If that's what you are, then that's what you are. There's no point in you being upset, trying to fight it and then failing. But, and I must stress this, I don't want you borrowing my underwear at all. It's not very hygienic, is it? Andrew didn't reply. Andrew. I'm going back to my room to sort some things out. I'll give you a shout in about 10 minutes. It'll give you time to change out of my underwear. Put them in the wash basket once you've changed, okay? When she said this, Andrew reflexes shot his legs out of sight. Helen looked at him and smiled. It's okay. But you know the rule now, don't you? By the way, I believe these are yours, she said, handing him the pair of socks she'd found in her bedroom. This is going to be hard work. Helen was beginning to formulate a plan of how to handle this situation. She cared a great deal for her brother and didn't like to see him upset. She wanted to have this chat just to make sure it wasn't just a fetish with him, which would be something that he had to deal with himself. Finding out he was a transvestite was different in her eyes. She didn't mind helping him out with this. In some ways it might be kind of fun, having a kid sister, someone to help dress up and give makeup tips to. Okay, he said eventually. With that, Helen got up and left Andrew to get changed. He looked at his watch. It was now just after 8:30. Then he quickly got changed out of her stuff and got dressed back into his own clothes. He was so frightened earlier when she discovered him, and especially when she'd threatened to tell Mom and Dad about it. Now, though, he felt relief. He was glad that Helen had found out. The way she was handling it and the way she let him talk about it was more than he believed possible. Just being able to talk about it and not risk being insulted or considered a freak or a sissy was such a great weight lifted from his shoulders. For somebody just to tell him it's okay meant more to him than he could ever imagine. Andrew, do you want to come in here, please? Helen shouted from her bedroom. When Andrew entered Helen's room, he noticed she'd changed out of her dress and into a pair of jeans and shirt. The dress was laid out on the bed. He also noticed that Helen had tidied up since earlier in the evening. Sit down on the bed, please. Andrew did just that. Right, I've got a few things to say here, so pay attention. Helen had a serious expression on her face. Andrew didn't know what to make of it. Had she found out something else? Had he torn or messed something up that Helen hadn't seen before? If she had, has her mood changed from understanding to angry again? Andrew tried to remember if there was anything else. Okay then. Here's what I've decided to do for you. I want to help you. If being a transvestite is what you are and want to be, then I'll help you become better at it and make it easier for you, but if you want to stop then I'll also try to help you with that as well, but it's got to be your choice, I can't make that for you. It's time for you to grow up and make that decision yourself. So which is it going to be? Which choice will make you happiest? Helen knew what the answer was going to be, but before continuing with her plan, she had to hear him make the choice and also take responsibility for it. Andrew sighed and then said, to be honest, Helen, life would be a lot simpler if I wasn't if I wasn't what I am. I've tried stopping in the past and it just makes me miserable. I think I'll just have to face up to what I am and learn to live with it. You do realize that it doesn't mean you want to be a girl, it just means you enjoy dressing up and being a girl part-time, don't you? You do understand the difference, don't you? Yeah, I mean I do realize, and that is what I want. Okay then, here's the deal. You first agree to follow certain rules and I'll help you. Okay? Helen went to her underwear drawer and pulled it open. First rule. This stuff's mine, you're not to take any of this stuff, okay? She then closed the drawer and opened the drawer beneath it. It also had underwear in it. He could see a couple of bras, pairs of panties, a suspender belt, some tights and stockings. This is your drawer. All the items in here are yours. I've started you off with a few things I don't need anymore. If the stuff stays in my room then Mom and Dad won't be any wiser, will they? Andrew agreed silently. He felt as though he'd be in Helen's debt forever. Helen then closed the drawer and went to another. In here are a few tops and skirts you can have as well. This is your drawer as well. Then she went to her wardrobe. It had 2 compartments in it and Helen opened both sides. Okay, I've put all my best stuff to one side, over here. All my everyday wear fills up the rest of the stuff. I've separated a few dresses here that are completely on the right-hand side, that you can have as well. Helen then turned to face Andrew again, sat dumbfounded on the bed. Next rule. I don't mind you borrowing my other stuff, but you must take care with it and put the clothes back neatly when done or put them in the wash basket. Eventually you'll get more of your own things and you're quite welcome to put them in here, but just remember the rules. Andrew nodded. Right, 2 more things to show you and one final rule, then I'm done. Shoes. I keep them at the bottom of the wardrobe and, again, you're quite welcome to borrow them. You'll eventually have to get your own, but we'll worry about that when you don't fit into mine anymore. Helen then picked up a bag from on top of the dresser and handed it to Andrew. Here's your makeup bag. There are quite a few things in there, old birthday and Christmas presents that I never used. I'll give you lessons on how to apply makeup in a while. If you're going to dress up and be a girl, then you might as well learn how to do it properly and see how much of a hassle it can be at times. Helen looked around her room with a puzzled expression for a few seconds. Eventually she said, right, that's it, I think. There's nothing more to show you. I think you'll find it's a pretty good starter kit for an aspiring girl. He couldn't believe his luck. The evening seemed to lurch from outright disaster to better than he could have ever hoped for. He was brought out of his daydreaming when he remembered something. You said there was one more rule that I had to agree to. Oh yes, I'd forgotten. This rule is really important for my peace of mind and also your safety, and if you can't agree to it then the deal's off. The rule is that you mustn't go outside dressed up regardless of how tempting it is. If you get discovered then you could be, at best, ridiculed, or worse, our family could be completely embarrassed. My main fear, though, is that something could happen to you. You could be beaten up or maybe even more severe. I don't want that on my conscience. If that happens because of what we've agreed here then I couldn't live with myself. So, no going out then, is that understood? Yes, it's understood. I promise I will abide by all the rules you said here. You've helped me out much more than I could have ever hoped for. I won't betray that trust. Okay then. If you're happy with all that then it's agreed. Do you have any questions? Just one. Why? Like I said earlier, I just want you to be happy. You've been moping around this house since last September and none of us knew why. shutting yourself off from everybody and being surly and rude to anybody who talks to you. We used to get on quite well for older sister and younger brother. I'd quite like that back again. I've also always wanted a kid sister to boss around as well. Well, I'll make one more rule then. If you are going to dress up and be a girl part-time, you must cheer up a lot more when you're Andrew. Go out some more, make friends again, start going out with girls again. Andrew smiled at this. It would all take some getting used to. His secret was out and it would take some adjusting to get used to the fact, but if Helen's willing to give it a try, then he's hardly got any room for complaint, has he? Andrew, what time is it? Just gone 9. Why? Okay, then we've got 3 hours to kill until Mom and Dad come back. I've not gone out and I haven't had any fun tonight, and seeing as how earlier you said you felt envious of how I looked and you wished you could look like that, well, tonight will be your big chance. First I'll give you a makeover, and I'll be giving you your first makeup lesson. Then you can get changed. I've left the dress out and some shoes, you can get changed once I've finished. Then I'll see you downstairs. How does that sound? It didn't seem as though there was any stopping Helen. Plus it sounded like a very good idea to Andrew, so he agreed. He was nervous. He'd never been dressed up in front of anybody before and wondered whether he'd have the nerve to actually go downstairs dressed up as a girl. Right, sit down here on this chair, in front of this mirror, and I'll show you how to apply makeup. I won't bother with your hair, as it's quite long anyway. We'll just tie it back in a ponytail for tonight. We've got quite a lot to get through. Helen got out a hairband and tied his hair back. He kept his hair fairly long and straight. A lot of his school friends were into heavy rock, as was he, and they all had long hair. Andrew, though, had an ulterior motive though. He wondered whether any of the others at school had grown their hair for the same reason. The first thing you need to remember is not to apply too much. You're bound to make that mistake at first, but you'll find a look that works for you. To be honest though, you've got similar skin tone and hair as me, so all this should be about right for you. We'll start with the concealer stick. This will hide any blemishes on your face. Just apply it and smooth it in. She handed him the little tube. He looked in the mirror and covered up some little spots and blemishes. Once you're happy, we'll go on to the foundation and face powder. I'll apply all the rest from now on. First she put the foundation all over his face and then a light covering of face powder. She then applied the blusher, warning him that this is one thing that a lot of women get wrong, they put too much on. After using the brush on his cheekbones, she checked his face and nodded to herself. She seemed happy with the results. Next came the eyes. First it was eyeshadow. She chose a dark brown on the lids and a much lighter shade around the eye. Right, keep still for the next bit. I'm going to apply the eyeliner. Keep your eyes open and your head still. I don't want to poke you in the eye. She gently applied the kohl pencil around the edge of his eyelids. Not too much, just enough to add some definition, and finally she did his mascara. Okay, that's your eyes done. One final thing now, the lipstick. She chose a burnt red color and applied it to his lips. She then asked him to smack his lips together and then purse his lips into a tissue to take off any excess. She then tidied up any imperfections and then stood back. Right, I'm done now. Think you could do that yourself next time? I think so. The more times you practice, the better you'll get at putting makeup on. You'll find a look that works for you. I decided not to do your nails for 2 reasons, because we don't really have enough time and also that they're in a complete mess. You will have to stop biting them if you want them to look good. Andrew looked down sheepishly. Okay then, I'm going downstairs now. If you want to get changed, I'll see you downstairs. You know where all your stuff is and the dress is on the bed. If I were you, I'd choose the black underwear and black tights as well. Put that jacket over the top and choose a pair of heeled shoes. Well, enjoy yourself, don't take too long. And with that she left him alone in the bedroom. His head was reeling, his heart was pounding, and he really couldn't believe what was going on. He was also very, very nervous. What if he looked stupid when he went downstairs and she started laughing at him? His paranoid self also thought, what if this was all a big joke to teach him a lesson? He nearly backed out when he thought of that. His rational self took over, and when he calmed down he decided that Helen wasn't like that in any way. Here he was, sat in her room, his face made up and his hair tied back in a ponytail. He'd come this far and there was no point stopping now. He started to get changed and decided not to look in the mirror again until he was fully changed. He followed her guidance and chose black underwear and tights. He was tempted to go for stockings, but on looking at the dress it was a little too short for him to get away with that. He put some padding in the bra cups and molded them into what he thought was a realistic shape. He then put the dress on. It was plain black, and stopping just above the knee, there was also a small slit up one leg. It was a sleeveless dress with a zip at the back, which he had a little difficulty fastening. Over his bare arms he put the small black jacket. He neatened his hair and then got some shoes out, black court shoes with a thin high heel and a strap at the back. Finished. He then looked in the full-length mirror and saw somebody he only half recognized. He was incredibly pleased with how he looked, but still managed to spend the next few minutes making small adjustments, making sure the bulge for his breasts looked okay and that the other bulge, lower down, was nowhere to be seen. Then, for the first time in his life he went downstairs dressed as a girl and, also for the first time in his life, was to present himself as a girl to someone else's view. Helen was sat in the kitchen, at the kitchen table. She heard the footsteps on the stairs but decided not to turn round and look until he was in the room with her. She wondered at what her reaction would be. Would she be honest enough to tell him the truth if he looked silly dressed up? Even though it would crush him. She decided to concentrate on keeping a fixed expression and trying to be constructive. Other thoughts were also on her mind. Had she taken this too far? Would he have grown out of this if she hadn't taken an active role to encourage it? It was his decision and it was obviously the thing that had been upsetting him, but maybe it would have disappeared after a period of time, months, maybe years. She was starting to worry that she might be helping to make the long-term situation worse. Especially if he looked strange or completely unconvincing when he was dressed up, would he then be stuck wanting something that was completely unachievable? Andrew had reached the bottom of the stairs and headed for the living room. "I'm not in there, I'm in the kitchen making a coffee. Do you want one?" She was trying to make the situation as normal as possible. She was still looking at the boiling kettle, lost in thought, when she heard a small cough behind her. In a very timid voice she heard, "Well, here I am." Helen slowly turned around, trying to control any emotion or any expression on her face. She looked at Andrew stood shyly in front of her, still in the doorway, not venturing into the kitchen as if ready to run back upstairs at the first sign of ridicule. He needn't have bothered though. Helen was pleasantly surprised to see standing in front of her was a completely convincing and attractive woman, with a good figure, pretty face and good legs. She was lost for words. Andrew was completely lost under the new persona. It just wasn't Andrew that was stood in front of her, it was someone else, a girl. A shocked expression started to form on Helen's face and Andrew noticed, and he then started to have a puzzled expression. With only a hint of worry in his voice he asked, "What do you think? How do I look?" Helen decided that she didn't have to lie to be positive, she didn't need to give a constructive opinion because the truth was positive enough. Oddly, there was something familiar about how he looked, not familiar in the sense that it was Andrew, but familiar in another way. She wondered whether he looked like somebody she knew, but she couldn't quite place it straight away, so let the puzzlement drop. "You look really, really good. I can't believe how good you look. I can't see Andrew at all there. It's a complete, convincing transformation. Nobody could tell there was a male underneath all that. Wow, I mean, really. You look really attractive. You make a good-looking woman." Andrew was stood in the doorway, looking shyly at Helen. He was quite slim, she noticed. The dress looked really good on him. It finished just above the knee and she noticed how shapely his legs were. He was about 5'5", as well, a similar height to Helen. That was when she realized who he reminded her of. Andrew dressed as a girl looked a lot like Helen. Now that she thought about it, it was no surprise. Not only could they be sisters, they are related after all, they could almost be twins. Why Andrew looked familiar is because that was almost the image Helen saw when she looked in the mirror earlier that evening, as she was getting ready, wearing more or less the same things. "Thank you," Andrew said quietly, softly. One good thing was that he wasn't trying a sing-song high-pitched voice in an attempt to sound feminine. He was just using a softer tone, but quite close to his own voice. That made it more convincing female voice and fitted in with his appearance. "Come in, sit down. I'm just going to make your coffee and then we'll go into the living room, okay? Thanks. So how does it feel? Your first time dressed up in front of someone. I guess it must be strange for you. You do look good though. I'm not just saying that. It felt strange at first. I nearly ran from the doorway. Every step downstairs was making me more nervous, but now I'm beginning to relax. I like the feeling, I like looking and acting like a girl and being treated like a girl as well." He sat down on the chair, smoothed his dress underneath him and crossed his legs. Eventually, the coffee was made and they went into the living room. Helen decided they had talked enough for one night about him being a transvestite and what it was like him being a boy dressed up. She decided to just talk to him as though it was a girl sat in front of her, which, if anyone was looking in from outside, is what it looked like. They talked about how school was going for him and how college was going for Helen. What Andrew wanted to do once the exams were finished. He'd already decided he wanted to go on to college, not stay on into the sixth form. He felt it would give him a fresh start. Helen then told him about her plans once college was finished, and also what college was like for her. She agreed with him that it would give him a fresh start. They carried on talking for a long while and Helen couldn't help noticing how much more relaxed Andrew was talking as a girl than he ever was as a boy. He sat quite naturally as a girl, he took on the mannerisms and habits of a girl very easily and they all looked right on him. He smiled a lot more, was interested in Helen and Helen's point of view and was much more confident in talking about serious issues than he ever was as Andrew, as a boy. As the evening progressed and his femininity was becoming more obvious, Helen started to have some doubts about her earlier thought about Andrew's transvestism. He seemed much more complete as a girl. Much more suited to it. Helen didn't voice her opinion, but she wondered whether Andrew was actually a transsexual rather than a transvestite, and whether sometime in the future, years, maybe even decades away, Andrew would be faced with a difficult choice, to become a woman full-time or to carry on as he is. The more the evening drew on, the more convinced Helen was that if he had to make the choice now, then the correct choice would be to become a woman full-time. That decision was for another day though. It, at least, made Helen more confident that she'd made the right choice in giving Andrew this opportunity to be a girl. If these feminine feelings in Andrew were as strong as it appeared, then there would only have been a life of misery if they had been suppressed. They carried on talking about relationships. Helen talked about this boy at college she wanted to ask out on a date, and Andrew talked openly and freely about his breakup with Lucy. Andrew then asked Helen if she wanted a coffee and, as he went into the kitchen to make one, Helen noticed how well he walked in high heels, obviously had a bit of practice in the past 6 months. When he came back in, they looked through a catalog at clothes, picking out things they liked but, more often, pointing out things that looked silly. Andrew made a few fashion mistakes as he pointed things out, but that was to be expected. Helen noticed the time was getting close to 11. Their parents were due home at around 11:30 to midnight. "I think you ought to get changed back at 11. Just to be on the safe side." Andrew looked crestfallen, but knew he had no choice. "Don't worry, you've still got 10 minutes. God, for a kid sister you can be really sulky, and don't think your pouting will work with me." They continued talking as they started to clear things up. "I still think you'll need a few things in the long term, not straight away though. I think you're going to need proper breast forms. They look okay, but a proper form would look better. Where they would be kept is going to be a problem though. You'll also need some jewelry, but I can sort you out with a few things, so don't worry. I think that eventually you'll need a wig. I don't think there'd be any problem with you passing as a woman convincingly in public, but I think your biggest concern will be if you're recognized, when you go outside, by someone that you know. A wig would hide the Andrew part of you a lot better when you go out. I thought one of the rules was I shouldn't go out. Well, it is for now. I don't think it would be a good idea at the moment, especially while you're still at school, but I didn't expect you to look as good as you do. A lot of my fears were misplaced. I don't think you'll have any problems when you go out. Anyway, us two on a night out together, there'd be no stopping us. We'd have men falling at our feet. That stopped Andrew for a second. He wasn't sure he liked the idea of that. He liked the idea of being found attractive as a woman, but that's as far as he'd thought about it. Helen noticed the shocked expression on Andrew's face. Don't worry. I was only kidding. Then to change the subject, anyway it's 11 now so you'd better get changed. There's some cleansing milk and some cotton wool on my dresser if you want to take some of that and clear the makeup off. Andrew went upstairs to get changed while Helen carried on tidying up. She was by now convinced that Andrew was better off as a woman. It just suited his personality a lot more. She had also decided that he had to make that decision for himself. No one else could make it for him. She'd be there to support him and help him, but she wasn't about to put the idea into his head. So she made up her mind never to voice this opinion. At 11:40 their parents pulled up in the car and came into the house. Helen was sat in the living room, as was Andrew, both watching television. Hi, Andrew, we're home. Any phone? See? Oh, hello Helen, thought you'd be out until the early hours. No, got to Jane's house and she cancelled, nobody was going out, so I came home. Oh dear, hope you haven't been too bored. No, I'm fine. I invited a friend round. She goes to the same college, different course though. Oh well, that's nice. It's good to get a different circle of friends. Keeps your options open. Has she gone home then, this friend of yours, or, what didn't you say her name was? Yeah, she left about 11. Her name is Angela. She lives local, very local. She's a bit younger than me, but really nice, really pretty too. I think I'll be seeing quite a lot more of her in the future. Helen glanced over to Andrew, who was blushing furiously. She smiled at him and he smiled back but kept staring ahead at the television. I hope Andrew didn't make a nuisance of himself when Angela was here. Helen looked over to Andrew and smiled. He looked back at her and smiled as well. Then Helen spoke, still looking at Andrew. No, no problem at all. In fact, I can honestly say that Andrew was nowhere to be seen all the time that Angela was here.